as a small aside, is there something you could say about FDR and Hitler? I constantly try to think: can this moment in history have been um, circumvented, prevented? Can Hitler have been stopped? Can some of the atrocities from my own family that like my grandparents had to live through the starvation in the Soviet Union. So the thing that people don't often talk about is the atrocities committed by Stalin and his own
Sure,
people.
sure.
It feels like here's this great leader, FDR, that had the chance to have an impact on the world that um, he already probably had a great positive impact, but had a chance to stop maybe World War II or stop some of the evils. When you look at how weak Hitler was from much of the 30s relative to militarily, relative to everything else, how many people could have done a lot to stop him? And FDR in particular didn't. He tried to play, um, not pacify, but basically do diplomacy and let Germany do Germany, let Europe do Europe, and focus on America. Is there something would you hold his feet to the fire on this, or is it very difficult from the perspective of FDR to have known what was coming?
I think FDR had a sense of what was coming, not quite the enormity of what Hitler was doing, and not quite the enormity of what the Holocaust became. I also lost relatives in the Holocaust, and part of that was beyond the imagination of human beings.
Yes.
But it's clear in his papers that as early as 1934, people he respected, who he knew well, told him that Hitler was very dangerous. They also thought Hitler was crazy, that he was a lunatic. Hamilton Fish Armstrong, who was a friend of Roosevelt, who was actually the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, had a meeting with Hitler in 1934. I remember reading the account of this. And he basically said to FDR, this man is going to cause a war. He's going to cause a lot of damage. Again, they didn't know quite the scale. So they saw this coming. They saw this coming. FDR had two problems. First, he had an American public that was deeply isolationist. The opposite of the problem, in a sense, that we were talking about before. If we're an over-militarized society, now we were a deeply isolationist society in the 1930s. The Depression reinforced that. FDR actually had to break the law in the late 30s to support the Allies. So it was very hard to move the country in that direction, especially when he had this program at home, the New Deal, that he didn't want to jeopardize by alienating an isolationist public. That was the reality. We talked about political manipulation. He had to be conscious of that. He had to know his audience. And second, there were no allies willing to invest in this either. The British were as committed to appeasement as you know. You're obviously very knowledgeable about this. The French were as well. It was very hard. The Russian government, the Soviet government, was cooperating to remilitarize Germany. So there weren't a lot of allies out there either. I think if there's a criticism to be made of FDR, it's that once we're in the war, he didn't do enough to stop, in particular, the killing of Jews. And there are a number of historians, myself included, who have written about this, and it's an endless debate. What should he have done? There's no doubt by 1944, the United States had air superiority and could have bombed the rail lines to Auschwitz and other camps. And that would have saved as many as 1,000,000 Jews. That's a lot of people who could have been saved. Why didn't FDR insist on that? In part because he wanted to use every resource possible to win the war. He did not want to be accused of fighting the war for Jews. But I think it's also fair to say that he probably cared less about Jews and East Europeans than he did about others, those of his own Dutch ancestry and from Western Europe. And so, even there, race comes in. Is also the explanation for the internment of Japanese in the United States, which is a horrible war crime committed by this heroic president. 120,000 Japanese American citizens lost their freedom unnecessarily. So he had his limitations, and I think he could have done more during the war to save many more lives, and I wish he had.
And there's something to be said about empathy that you spoke, that FDR had empathy. But us, for example, now there's many people who describe the atrocities happening in China. And there's a bunch of places across the world where there's atrocities happening now. And we care. We do not uniformly apply how much we care for the suffering of others,
That's correct.
depending on the group.
That's correct.
And in some sense, the role of the president is to rise above that natural human inclination to do the us versus them, to protect the inner circle, and empathize with the suffering of those that are not like you.
That's correct. I agree with that.
Yeah.